I see the participants filing in. 82. Nice. All right, we're good to start. So hello, everybody. My name is Jason Simmons. I am an associate professor and program coordinator of the sport administration program at the University of Cincinnati. And we are sponsoring this NACDA webinar for all of you, giving an opportunity to hear a little bit about some of the latest research from one of my colleagues, Dr. Matt Huml, who's on this call, has been doing research for several years now on the experience of college athletics employees. So I can take a minute to introduce Matt Huml. And then also on this call is Brittany Keller, a 10-year veteran of college athletics who recently left the industry for many of the reasons that we'll be talking about throughout this session. And so without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and get started, and we will share our screen. All right. Matt, can you see the screen? Good to go. Okay, so our presentation today is titled Fulfilling but Exhausting: The Challenges for Employees Working in College Athletics. And we have the chat open, so if you have questions throughout at any time, feel free to drop a question into the chat. I'm going to serve as a moderator on this call, and I can tee the questions up to Matt or Brittany as they're coming in. To give you a quick rundown of where we're going today, there are 5 overarching topics that Matt's going to be discussing, starting with workaholism, which is defined as an overcommitment to a work and a disability to disengage once the traditional work hours are over. Burnout and the negative ramifications associated with burnout and all of the time and all the other demands that are into the job that become overwhelming. We'll talk a bit about the work-family interface and how work can spill over and affect family functioning, and the challenge of college athletics employing of balancing the simultaneous demands of both the work and family role. We'll talk about how calling or one's passion for the work drives or motivates folks to work in athletics, and how that interacts with some of these other variables like workaholism and burnout. And then we'll talk about remote work. That was remote work was commonplace over COVID. Now most folks are back in the office, but we'll talk about what remote work looked like and how those boundaries of work and family time were blurred a little bit as remote work took form, and what it looks like as we're now back into brick and mortar athletic departments. But our first topic here, I'm going to turn it over to Matt Huml to start talking about, is workaholism. So Matt, what are we talking about specifically with workaholism?
Yeah, thanks, Jason. And I think this speaks to the importance of this topic, that a lot of you probably are having challenges at work, that we have an incredible amount of registrants and people that are here today listening in on this. So we appreciate you taking some time to kind of also give us feedback, but then listening to some of the things that we found from you. All this data that we've collected, and it's going to go over these next 5 topics, are related to research that we've collected in the last 5 years from athletic department employees, whether that's administrators, coaches, all kinds of different units within athletics. But this all kind of stemmed from initial conversation on workaholism. And Jason kind of teed this up, but you can see the definition here. It's just oversaturation of one identity or commitment to that job. And it's the struggle to disconnect. And we're going to talk a little bit about that struggle of disconnecting when we get to remote work as well. But this ends up leading to people that are willingly going beyond job description and deciding that other roles outside of work are essentially not as important, that you are going to essentially focus and prioritize work over other activities, responsibilities, family, leisure time, even just like personal hygiene or personal health is going to get put on the back end. And workaholism can kind of be activated by 2 things. One, some people have those traits that are related to work, being a workaholic. So maybe you have certain tendencies like a type A personality that's going to essentially make you at a greater risk of becoming a workaholic or having workaholic tendencies within there. So that's kind of the key there. If you're going to have some traits that are going to make you at a greater risk, but then also we're starting to see on some of our recent results that certain work culture norms are also activating workaholism for people. One big thing that we found is there's kind of two sides of the coin. One is workaholism, which is this really negative association with the work. And the other one we found is work engagement. And work engagement, obviously the very positive side of this, it's feeling satisfied with your work experiences, eager to keep going because you're getting great satisfaction, fulfillment from that. Workaholics don't actually get as much fulfillment from it. It just becomes essentially like an addiction, like a behavioral addiction. But what we found is people that work in really terrible work climates, what we call an overwork climate or a toxic work culture, are at a greater risk of losing some of that positive work, that work engagement, and having it turn into that workaholism. And some of you probably have recognized within your work, the situation is going to be that some of you work in really toxic work situations, whether that's a direct supervisor or maybe there's an overwork culture being stemmed from upper administrators or essentially within the athletic department itself of needing to work excessive hours, needing to continue to push, lots of competition emphasis being put on play. And this is also going to be activating for a lot of people workaholism tendencies. And that's kind of the big concern there. And so that's where we've seen workaholism has a lot of negative consequences. And we've written out here, we're going to get to burnout. And I think that one's next, but we're going to see a lot of poor emotional health, reduced retention, which is a big issue for athletic departments, which we're going to talk about later. With the amount of people that are potentially leaving, or not only just leaving the job, but maybe leaving the industry itself. You're also seeing that employees are going to work, or performance is going to be worse, which is a big thing. Administrators, I think, constantly think building workaholism would be a good thing, but actually it means worse performance. So it's something that we don't want to do. And then that identity saturation, there's lots of, like, you can look out there and we have some of the stuff on here about some of the negatives that are related to that. But you can kind of see, we found from our data that workaholism is heavily ingrained in college athletics. This isn't just a couple bad apples, as they say, but this is something that is a systemic issue within athletics that we need to stem. And some of it is, again, individuals coming in that are willing to become workaholics, but it's also that culture that's kind of mimicking a lot of those traits to essentially cause a problem. But it just creates a cultural pressure for people to start becoming a workaholic as a means of having a successful career, moving up the food chain, moving or having ways to survive. But kind of from there, I'm going to pass it back over to Jason and let Brittany kind of talk, especially more about the practitioner perspective.
Yeah, Matt, let me ask real quick before we toss it over to Brittany. Can you talk a little bit about how you got some of this data, where some of these findings came from within college athletics?
Yeah, so we did some data collections for lots of, probably the folks that are here attending saw that we did a data collection back in 2017, but we also did a bigger data collection also in 2019. And then we did one right in May 2020 after COVID hit to kind of look at some of this workaholism piece. And so one thing that I think we're going to talk a little bit about in the remote work section as well, but workaholism is also getting accelerated within a remote work setting. And that's kind of a big concern right now with us having remote work. And I think a part of it is workaholics need some type of separation. When the nice thing is when you are going to the office, there is some physical separation of you having to go in your car or the bus, however you're getting to work. And that separation's been good, but you're seeing some of that negative on there. But we ended up asking lots of people about workaholic traits, essentially not just from themselves, but also what they thought was being ingrained by their athletic department. And essentially this was allowing us to kind of look at relationships between workaholism and burnout that we have on here. We also have some stuff with career commitment that we're going to talk about later as well.
So Brittany, would you define yourself as a workaholic when you're working in ticket operations?
Not necessarily. However, it just comes with the territory that you're just working all of the time, the hours that you're putting in, all the different projects that are coming on, and especially depending on what season it is, you just tend to work outside of the 8 to 5, 9 to 5 time area. So you're automatically kind of considered a workaholic because you're working beyond that 5 o'clock. You're working until 6, 7, 8, 9 plus. I found myself this past fall working up until 10 o'clock most weeknights because of everything that we had going on during the season. So I necessarily wouldn't consider myself a workaholic. However, I probably was because then I talked to my friends who are outside of athletics in this industry, and they're like asking me how I'm doing all of this and why did I not just leave, or why didn't I go in the next day after we worked events? And you can't do that. So you're working in this industry I believe you're automatically a workaholic because of all the hours and all the projects that you have to be done. But I've also known people in this industry who truly are workaholics, where they don't turn it off at all. And they're always on, they work till 9 o'clock at night, go home, and they're still sending out emails. I've known some people who haven't really taken a true good vacation in a while, and it's not great, but there are times where we are able to shut it off, but it just kind of depends on the season and the time of year.
And you've been with multiple athletic departments in your career. Matt was talking about this idea that workaholism, there's this thought that workaholism is necessary for athletic departments to be successful. Do you find whether it's explicitly stated or whether it's just implied, that there's an expectation for folks to adopt this workaholic mentality within athletics?
Yeah, I mean, it's weird. It not really necessarily implied, but it kind of is, where there'd be times where I would take a day off and I'd feel guilty about it. I would feel guilty about taking a vacation or leaving early or anything. I mean, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but this past fall, and there's been other times throughout my career where I worked so much and I would feel guilty about going to a doctor appointment, doing something where it takes away from work. And there's a lot of times where you have administrators and your boss or whoever saying, no, you're fine. But at the end of the day, there's still that guilt that you feel from taking time away from work, because everyone knows what needs to get done. And there's, again, all of the projects that we have, you feel like you need to get that done at that time and within a certain time period. And if you're not doing that because you're going to the doctor or taking just a mental day, that's not going to look good on your part.
And Matt, you had said something interesting, that workaholism isn't necessarily related to higher productivity, right? You would think the opposite would be true. The more people are working, the more connected they are, that more would be getting done within the athletic department. But you're finding that's not the case?
Yeah, and this isn't even something necessarily that we looked at, but there's pretty widespread acceptance within the literature about workaholics aren't necessarily good job performers. They're just someone that's always job active. And to me, that's a big thing, is workaholism really kind of the antithesis of efficiency. It's really about constantly doing everything and anything at all times. And essentially leads to lots of poor emotional health, sleep deprivation, issues like that also are pretty strongly related to bad performance. So that's the thing, is, and athletic departments do not want workaholics. You want engaged workers. Those are your real benefits, the positive side of this workaholism, people that are excited about what they do, love what they do, but also have a way to disconnect and move on and also enjoy the other roles that they enjoy on the daily.
Yeah. Definitely want to remind our participants, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll make sure they get included here in the presentation. But Matt, I'm guessing that workaholism is also linked to our next topic, which is burnout.
Yeah, so this is like one of the key connections that's been ongoing for a long time, is workaholics have this strong association from workaholism to burnout, that there's this big key. And that's the big thing, is, again, I think sometimes as administrators, they love the idea of like, it'd be great to have a bunch of workaholics. We can just get so much done and all this. But really, it's the idea that it creates burnout, which is going to leave, like, there's all kinds of negatives with burnout. You have people leaving the industry. You have people that essentially are going to be hating their job, also not communicating well with their colleagues, all kinds of issues. But the biggest issue if you're an administrator is people leaving. The nice thing is you build this institutional knowledge. You have people that stay there that are happy and they're able to do their job more efficiently. They're also able to connect with external stakeholders. There's tons of benefit of having long-term retention of your employees. And if you lose that, essentially you start to lose some really good people. And there's also the higher HR costs of when you have to replace someone, and you also have to use a lot of other people's time to interview the right people and bring those people in. But this brain drain is bad also in the sense of, a lot of athletics isn't a huge high paying industry. I mean, unless you're one of the very select few, like football coaches and head ADs and a few of the top administrators, you're really not making a lot of money. You're doing this for passion, which we're going to get to for calling later. And so the idea is if it becomes tougher and you have more negatives, those people are going to leave, especially if they're younger, if they aren't as pod committed, if they haven't moved up the food chain enough, they will just leave for a more stable, less pressured industry, because to them, they'd rather have some better work-life satisfaction than if they aren't. And so that's the big thing. It's this burnout that we're creating with industry is really harmful. We're losing lots of really good quality, smart people. And we're also losing a great diverse set of people, because we're also finding that women are not only at a greater risk of workaholism, that also means they're at a greater risk of burnout, which means you're at a greater risk of losing women in the industry. We had a study where we looked at different career archetypes as people move up the food chain athletics, and we found out that the split is actually about 50-50, maybe even slightly more, like 51-49 for more women at the entry level position. But we lose more and more women the further we go up the food chain, which means we're losing an incredible amount of people that could be great innovators in our field future or in the future, but instead they're leaving to go to a different, more stable, more welcoming industry. And that's the big kind of loss that's going on there.
Yeah, Matt, we definitely see a lot in the literature looking at the experiences of women when we get into that work-family interface, which is the next topic, right? And some of the additional societal pressures put on women, particularly as they get married, have children, and those familial responsibilities that more largely fall on women than men, that can complicate this even further. Brittany, I know when you made the tough decision to leave the industry, you made a pretty passionate, LinkedIn post sharing your story, and a lot of that had to do with burnout, but not just burnout itself, but some of the personal side effects that burnout was causing for you. Are you open to sharing kind of some of what you were experiencing?
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I over the summer, I had gotten a great promotion, and I was so excited for it. Coming off COVID, having the season that the Bearcats had on the football field, it was a lot. And and we were kind of going through a transition in our department where we were hiring a lot of new people, which was very exciting, very needed. But then it just came to me where it was kind of a lot on my plate, and I was trying very hard to get help from different directions and everything, but it was just so overwhelming. We also had outside of events coming in that we had to work on and work through, that I just kind of mentally broke down. And I know that that is a huge thing that happens in athletics, happens with all of the hours that we put in. I will be open and say I had a few panic attacks. I had a few mental breakdowns, and it just really kind of affected my everyday life. And that's one thing that I've noticed with, and I've heard throughout my time in athletics, from my first few years in athletics, I've known people who have had those same situations where they've had mental breakdowns and everything. And you just push through it because that's what you're supposed to do. What I would love to see is having that support from colleagues, from administration, all of that, where they acknowledge and they see and they want to help you out. But again, with everything that we have going on, you don't have all that time to really do. And that's where I kind of struggled, because I was like, okay, I am acknowledging that I'm having these issues. I probably should go see a doctor or do something self-care kind of thing, but I would feel guilty for taking that time off because there were so many things that needed to get done. Mm-hmm. So it's just, it's that continual kind of what's more important, what kind of prioritizing all of those things. And it just kind of and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I realized that I wasn't enjoying my job anymore because of that. It was a lot of different factors with working so much and having so much on your plate, that I kind of just broke down a little bit. And it broke my heart because I love this industry so much. I've been in it so long. So it's heartbreaking to go through something like that. So, and that's why I'm so open about and sharing my journey and talking about mental health and everything, because I know this isn't just me. I know this is something that's happening throughout the industry in athletics and beyond. So many other industries are going through the same thing. So I am thankful that mental health is being talked about a little bit more, because we can be open about this. And I want that discussion to be happening in the departments, because you're having that discussion with student athletes, which is so important and so key. But you should also be having that for your employees as well.
Mm-hmm. Got a couple of questions that have come in so far. Matt, I don't know if your research has gotten into this aspect of it yet, but someone asked if they're feeling burnt out and they're feeling experiences like Brittany's sharing here, like where do we go from there? How do we go about talking to our supervisors about that to try to remedy the situation?
Yeah, so I mean, this is something that I'll probably hit harder too in the recommendations, but I think the big thing that athletics is missing that we talked about with more work isn't better work is that, especially during the summer months, probably roughly around here for some folks, but especially for the non-spring semester sport related or focused sports is going to be in about a month. There's opportunities for downtime that we can take advantage of. And I'm not talking about like a whole month of time, but units can essentially take a week off here and there, and it would not affect performance whatsoever. And that tees up a great question of, I have a study right now that I'm collecting, because one thing I've always noticed is whenever coaches have a poor season, the answer is always for them of, we just need to work harder. And to me, it's like there's gonna be a coach out there that says we just need to somehow work 300 hours this week. And it's like, it's not even, the math isn't even gonna make sense, but that seems to be the only solution sometimes for athletics is struggling, is to work harder. And we're doing a study right now. We've already found with D1 employees that there's actually zero correlation between hours worked, self-reported hours worked, and team success. And for administrators or for staff members, there's zero correlation between hours worked and like team director cup points accumulation over the year. So to me, we're finding out that working those extra 10, 20, 30 hours, whatever is being pushed within the industry, actually isn't getting any type of benefit. So to me, that's a big thing, is like, these extra hours that are creating my burnout aren't actually benefiting us whatsoever. But then I also think it needs to be a bigger discussion with administrators and especially supervisors to talk about, we need to find time where our units can have like a week or two off, or even go to like a severe hybrid model to help reduce some of this burnout workaholism that kind of builds up over the year. And then if you don't ever find a release, you're just going to continue in this terrible situation like Brittany kind of really hit on, of you're going to potentially be at risk of like panic attack or other health issues that are going to be going on. That'd be the big thing, is I think athletics needs to think much more long-term with employees and how can we make sure we maintain them. And one of those is trying to build in more creative ways for giving folks time off away from the office, and even downtime, even if that means like a temporary removal of email access. I think that could really pay off, but I'll hit those again later too on the recommendations.
Yeah, another question just came in is like, well, what if your supervisor, the person that you go talk to, is feeling burnt out? Right. And I mean, then we're moving up the ladder here.
Yeah. And this will be probably a good transition to when we get to work-family interface, because I do think some of this is, we are seeing all the way up to the mid-tier managers are experiencing severe levels of burnout, because they are still expected to work an incredible amount of hours and have a lot of responsibilities, and maybe they aren't being compensated or getting the potential benefits of some of the upper level admins are getting. And so, yeah, I think, but to me, there probably is some benefit for the front lines folks that are also seeing their supervisor burnout, because to me, you have someone that's in a position of at least some power that's also experiencing same things as you. And then it becomes a question of how can we collaboratively think of a schedule or ways that we can relieve some of this burnout. I know Brittany and I, we've had conversations about like, what can you actually do in 40 hours? And is that, whether it's like on a week, and is there stuff beyond those 40 hours that really necessarily has to get done? Or is that stuff that just, there's lots of pressure being physically present in athletics, and it's not necessarily about getting actual benefit from there, just looking like you're working. But again, if you have a supervisor that's also at risk of burnout, which would not be surprising to me, then it becomes, okay, how can we collaboratively work together to not only lessen my burnout, your burnout, but then also all the people that are essentially working within our unit? Because I think each individual unit has really unique situations that can also find ways to relieve some schedule stress.
Right. And before we move to the work-family interface, we had a question on the workaholism. If we can just step back to that for a second. In your research, Matt, did you find any relationships between staffing levels in athletic departments and workaholism? So like athletic departments with fewer staff members or understaffed members, did you find more that employees were forced to work more or less?
We didn't directly look at that, but I can tell you that we have a number of quotes, especially from lower. So you especially see this issue of people having to wear lots of hats or having to do lots of different responsibilities at D2, D3, and then also what I call burgeoning new areas. So like strength and conditioning is pretty much now mainstream, but even like 5-6 years ago, some athletic departments were only having one person run S&C for the whole athletic department. But that's an example. Esports, another one that's really growing. Dietetics, with more nutrition focused. Some of those positions really get a lot of risk of this burnout workaholism because the athletic department has 50,000 hours. They hire one person and they're expecting $400,000 of output from that one person. And that becomes a real risk. And then what also happens with events, like event operations, you get a new facility and they potentially have to save money on staffing. But yes, staffing issues was a very big thing that got brought up in qualitative responses where people are saying that 3 people left and now they've only hired one person. And now they're expecting 2 people to do 3 people's jobs. And then it kind of continues to grow like that. And obviously some of this is stemming from budget cuts from COVID, but then also some of it is just people think it's just great if they can save money that way and then give money somewhere else, and they just think somehow that nothing is going to drop, the output isn't going to recede.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's move on to this next topic because we've alluded to it a few times, and I think this is another one of those areas where we see burnout and workaholism really start to have an impact in folks' life outside of work, is the impact on family. And Matt, I'm sure as you'll talk about, we're not just talking about when you have kids. It's, when we have, aging adults we're taking care of in our household, or when we're married or dating in a serious relationship. Those time demands associated with work, the stress associated with work, having to work 7 days a week, being on call 24 hours a day. That stress and those time demands can conflict with responsibilities I have with home, can spill over and affect my mood and attitude at home. Is your research supporting some of this?
Yeah, and this is not only just spouses, it's also kids. It's also if you have aging parents maybe in the household. It's also if you really engage in the community, like how you define your family is completely up to you, but you'll see lots of different forms of this. Balance was kind of the original thing, work-family balance. I think we all realize that finding the perfect balance is just not necessarily an achievable thing, but you'll see enrichment. Enrichment is kind of where work enriches or benefits family and vice versa. Spillovers when those activities kind of flow from one side to the next. And then conflict is something that all of us have experienced at some point, that one side of that responsibility is just conflicting with the other. And this is the challenge. And so at times, athletics can really cannibalize our time, and it ends up being that it just continues to ask for a little bit more time. It might be, okay, Brittany, we have a game, so we need you an extra couple hours here, a couple hours there. Then after a while it becomes the norm. And then the next time I ask you, isn't really about adding those 3 hours you were doing before. It's really adding 3 hours on top of the additional 3 hours you did the season before, because this is a big game or whatever. So work-family interface has a lot of these challenges that are going on and the issues they have within these challenges. But work-family interface has got some good and bad to it. We have kind of found that it can deter some burnout, can deter workaholism, but also depends on the situation. So for example, if you're a workaholic, and we've already talked about it, workaholism creates greater burnout. But we've found out that if you have work-family conflict in between those, it actually will increase. So if you're dealing with burnout at work and you're also having conflict between work and family, that's only accelerating the issue of the burnout that's going on. But we've also found that sometimes work-family conflict can be good. And one is, when we did a study between work engagement, again, that's the positive of that work experience, and workaholism, the negative, we actually found that work-family conflict is working well as almost like a centering agent, that you're realizing that you have greater things involved, like you maybe also have work or family responsibilities to take care of. And that might deter you from becoming too much of a workaholic, because it's almost like a counterbalance. You're having enough activities on the other side that is deterring you from going too far in one direction. But again, there's work-family conflict. Employees that are higher on conflict between work and family work are women. And a lot of that is because there's a lot of these social norms within women that they have to be the the person that's taking care of all household responsibilities. So imagine you're a woman working in athletics and you're working in a dynamic industry that's also requiring an incredible amount of time. It's very prioritizing of your time. And then now you also are getting a lot of these social norms that you're expected to do more and more and more at home. That's really tough. Like you're really in a rock and a hard place between there. And so we're seeing a lot of challenges there for women. Now, implications for athletics. Athletics likes to, and I hear this term all the time, work-life integration. I'm not a big fan of this because to me, it seems like athletics answer isn't so much that we should give you more family time. It's that you should bring family to us. And for some people, that's okay. And this definitely shouldn't be something that you shouldn't bring your family into the workplace, because I think that's awesome. But the idea that they just think that that's the solution is not a good idea. And we've gotten responses from people that certain people of power, like the athletic director, coach, maybe some people of great privilege can bring their kids to the workplace, but there is kind of this unspoken it's like unspoken disagreement on you shouldn't bring your kids in at all. So there's also kind of that power disparity that also plays into those work-family interface issues that revolve around athletics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Brittany, I know from conversations that we've had, I know you yourself don't have kids, but you've worked with folks that have kids, you've been in relationships. Kind of what have you felt with the tug and pull of trying to satisfy those work demands while, also trying to, have a life outside of work and tend to family needs?
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of seen a little bit of it all. I've had colleagues bring in their children for a half day or just for a couple hours because they need to. I've had bosses or colleagues leave for a couple hours or take a day off to work from home to handle to work with their children and handle whatever needs are at home. And everyone, I believe, what I have seen has been very okay, like they've been okay with that and they've understood, and there hasn't been any huge issues with that at all. So I think that's been pretty healthy in a sense of what I have seen. However, there are times where I think there's more pressure than for people who are single, who don't have children, to work more to overcompensate for the parents and everything. So there's that disconnect, that unbalance there, but everyone does understand the issue of family is the most important thing. And then when it comes to women in the workforce and having a family, on my side of things, external side of things, from what I know and what I've seen, there aren't a lot of women higher up. I haven't really had many women bosses in general, but also women bosses who have children because of everything that we have to go through. So it's very unique to see a woman in charge of the ticket office who also has 1-2 children, married. So it's very unique and interesting to kind of see that dynamic with it. You see a lot of women coaches who have families and they're handling it and they're rock stars and strong, amazing women. But then you just don't see that many women in the external side where they're having that full family. And it depends on the school, on the department and everything. But from my experience, I really haven't seen that many women leaders in that role with married with children.
Yeah. We'll definitely get to some recommendations toward the end of this, but as I'm reading through some of the comments that are coming in, it seems to some extent we're preaching to the choir a little bit. Folks are talking about like they wear so many hats, they're so connected that they're administrators and athletic directors, they're aware of this stuff, they talk about this stuff, but no policies ever get implemented to alleviate some of these issues. That at some smaller schools, it's just these systemic issues that this is what it is. Like, it's the realization there's no time when you're not at work, you're always on call. And Matt, where do we, and Brittany too, like where can we even start with some of this stuff to help with some of these issues that people working all across the industry are feeling?
Yeah, I think my first response to that is, and it's like, it sucks that we're preaching to the choir. I also think it speaks to that we had so many people register for this that it's such a problem that we need to keep exploring it. I think that's a big thing for me. And that success level study that I talked about earlier, it's really important for me to do this because I feel like so many people in athletics think that this culture is needed to win and that we have to do this to be successful. And I just don't believe it. I just don't believe that suddenly we think Nick Saban is a great coach because he works 8 hours more than every other coach. Like it's just, that's not a realistic situation. And so to me, it's more of, if I can provide meaningful stuff that shows like, hey, these extra hours that you're pushing your employees to do are actually counterintuitive, that not only you're losing more employees, you're not being more successful. Just, I need to keep providing facts to people that essentially it's not being more successful, that you're actually being counterproductive, that you're hurting the employees you have, you're losing this knowledge, you're also losing or having a greater losses pile up, whether that's on the field or essentially within other areas that are being metrically compared, that it's not successful. But to me, the other thing is see if you can get involved in search committees. Brittany brought up a good point. See if you can somehow be a part that can help you motivate that your company either hires women, but especially women that are also have other family responsibilities. It doesn't even have to be someone that has kids, someone that also has other family leisure activities, someone that can speak to the experiences that are going on at the lower level. Because we're starting with our career archetypes paper, when we did the senior level folks, a lot of those people seem to say like, hey, I made it through this maze of challenges. And so now the next people should too. Like if I can do it, you can do it. And that's like, it's, hey, that's awesome that you made it, but it's also, we're losing lots of great people that will just become a great person somewhere else. And so that's the big thing is how can we, once we get into these middle management, upper level administrators, make those changes? And part of it is mimicking the activities that you need. If you have FMLA, you should take it. If you have family leave time and you need it, you should do it. If you can find ways to explore ways that give your unit some time off, you should do it because it's not going to hurt. If anything, you're going to retain more employees and save money, and you're not going to lose any job performance.
Yeah, a comment just came in that, administrator might respond to some of these issues or complaints with like, well, this is the norm in athletics. You knew this was the norm when you got in. This is what we all go through. Like, you signed up for this. Brittany, did you notice some of that culture and in the various athletic departments that you worked in that, hey, this is the expectation you signed up for. We all did it, so you got to do it. Is that prevalent?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's again, one of those where everyone's just expected to work kind of all the time. Even when you go home, you're expected to maybe answer an email. You're just on that, like, not high edge or on edge or anything, but you're just known to, okay, I have to look at, like, work's not technically done. I still need to keep track of my emails, unless you know for sure you have nothing really going on. But during a football week, you're still looking at emails. I remember I've had people who've left the industry and they've been yelled at because they've sent an email after 5, and that's just, you don't get that. It's the complete norm. I've gotten emails at 2 a.m. from somebody at 2 a.m. That's just what you do. And we're looking at, and this is where I think a good change can come in is, I mean, our administrators they started off doing that. And so that's how they always do it, what we said, but we're having all of these young students, young professionals come in and put all of the hours, like crazy amount of hours, because, okay, we've put our time in, now it's your time to put it in. But they're the ones that are also getting burnt out. They're realizing they're creative, what they can do. They can do that outside of athletics for more money or whatnot. So this is the time where we can change, especially what we've gone through during COVID, knowing that we can there's a lot more times where we can take a step back and breathe and not have people put in all of the hours that we have put in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's definitely, like, I was hoping that COVID kind of really put a pause and we could revamp things, but what I experienced was we just went back full force and having to put in all of the hours. It was like that time off really never happened.
Yeah, Matt alluded to this earlier in prior conversations we were having with Brittany, is that about this idea of like, well, what happens if you just work 40 hours a week? And 40 hours is an arbitrary number anyway, but you're saying, oh, you can't get everything done.
Yeah, I don't think
said,
that's a thing.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on, again, the time of year, what season you're in and everything. In June, that is the time that really there's nothing going on outside of softball and baseball postseason. So that's when usually everyone takes their vacations. That's when you should be getting 40 plus hours a week. You should not be working more than that. And you should be having like half days on Fridays or being able to come in and do whatever you want. However, there is that kind of fine line of, okay, we have no outside of events going on. So you should be doing so many things now because it's so quiet. So and then July starts and that's when we revamp into football season and everything. So it's hard to say exactly that you can do things in 40 hours a week, but again, it depends on the season and the week and what you have going on. So it's a possibility, but not all year long.
Yeah. I mean, questions and comments are coming in pretty fast and furious. Obviously, we won't have time to get to everyone, but it seems like a lot of people are bringing up this idea of, how do we change this culture that's here? Like, how do we go about changing this mentality? Folks talking about, just a lack of staffing issues. One of the folks that commented in is like they're at a junior college and there's just 2 full-time staff members and 2 facilities 20 miles apart. And, the college athletic and people in the college administration don't understand the demands that are placed on folks that work in athletics either, which sometimes hold the purse strings for resources. Matt or Brittany, thoughts on communicating and interacting with those on the college administration side to kind of enlighten them on what the demands are being placed on folks working in college athletics?
Yeah, I mean, I saw that comment from Kevin. Kevin is a former junior college attendee and associate's degree holder. I appreciate seeing some JUCO folks on here. I would say, like, especially you're the front porch. Like, a lot of people, especially at the community college level, they're only going to know you partially because of athletics. And so part of that is going to be part of your marketing pitch to your administration, but also you can look at other units and how many people they have working, like how many building associate office workers are they having to essentially make that building operate? And then you also have a time distance between that. And that would be my big argument is look at my labor hours I'm able to spend on units that are significantly far away that also need a different type of maintenance provision that other units do not have to have, especially for playing surfaces and all that. And then that travel time, also the teams travel, like there's lots of different work experiences that are unique for yours that you won't necessarily have on other portions of campus. And I think someone else mentioned about like I forgot what it was, but it was connected to essentially people don't understand. They think when there's a game going on, I forgot someone mentioned that they think when there isn't a game going on that we aren't doing anything.
Right. Yeah.
I think like that one definitely speaks to me. I remember as a staff member at Texas Tech University back in the day, we did a study abroad meeting and faculty member asked who to contact. And like in the summer when there's an emergency and the staff member said, just call me. And she goes, well, I'll need your cell phone, right? Because you don't work in the summer. And it's like, there is a lot of ignorance for faculty and administrators. And I say that as me as a faculty member and administrators on what actually goes on in a day-to-day. And that's the part for you is you need to preside and make that illumination. You need to explain to them what's going on. The one thing is some people love being at games. Like Brittany can bring an administrator to a game and she can actually see what goes on to make her life work and make athletics work during that time. And they'll realize that it's not all this dog and pony show and being able to watch sports. A lot of it's this behind the scenes gritty activity that happens day to day for all of you that goes on. And they'll like providing that illumination is always a key. Like you need more resources. You need to be able to paint the best picture you possibly can for your leadership to explain what goes on to make that happen. And it isn't about Luke Fickell as the UC football coach coming out and he gets a call plays and then someone turns the lights off when the game's over. Like it's never that simple, but for a lot of administrators, if they aren't around that stuff, sometimes that's the only way that they're viewing this activity until you can show them a different picture of what's going on.
Sure. All right, let's get to our next topic, just for the sake of, we got 16 minutes left here in our call. And our next topic is calling. And this has been brought up before. Brittany, you were talking about like you were driven to work in sport. And you were so heartbroken when you had to leave because this was your passion. This is what you felt you were called to do in life. And we see, students that are coming into our master's program, like that's their big draw, right? And I think for most people here is that they're passionate about sport, whether they played their whole life or they grew up as a fan of sport, and they just want their lives to be part of it. Yet that's why they're doing this, and they're not being compensated or getting those benefits equitable to the work they're putting in. So Matt, what can you tell us about calling and how it fits in with these other topics of workaholism and burnout and work-family interface?
Yeah, and I think Brittany did a great job talking about this earlier. That sense of dread when you have to leave, that you just love what you do. There's such passion. So many people are excited to talk to you, like, hey, Brittany, what's it like? What's going on in UC football these days? Or man, it's amazing. Like, people want to connect. It's like the one of the few jobs that people want to talk to you about what's going on, because they either love sport or obviously so many of us have experienced sport growing up, but it's this like purpose and meaning that's built into what you do. And there's actually probably my favorite academic article I've ever read is about zookeepers and calling, because to me, it speaks to like calling is a lot of what you want to do as a kid. And it's things that we all want to be an athlete, or you talked about being a zookeeper. And it's this article talking about this great fulfillment that you get from working in this specific area or within a specific job that you have. And a lot of us feel this, and it shouldn't come to surprise to you that we did some data collection. We have a paper under review on this. And people working in athletics score extremely high in calling. There's lots of people that feel purposely driven. You also see this called meaningful work. And that's this connection to people working within the industry. But also, like, there's good and bad with this. And the good is that there's lots of individual employee benefits of being called to your profession. And I wrote them down here. I won't have to read them out loud, but the resistance to me is great because we're already seeing that there's a high level of burnout that's going on when in athletics and overwork climate, and that calling can help resist against this. So you also are seeing some benefit if you're more willing, or sometimes I've seen a study called grittiness. Grittiness can also be connected to this, but if you're called to something, you're going to give it a longer time to work, even if things aren't going well around you, even if we have toxic leadership or whatever, you're willing to push through and try to still make things work because you still love so many of the intricacies around your job as fulfilling you in some way. Now, to me, the risk is, and some people have talked about this in the chat, is this employer expectation. We're seeing some comments from people like, hey, if you want to work 40 hours a week, then this isn't for you. We'll find someone else, cheaper, younger, more hungry, yada, yada, yada. Like, I have a lot of thoughts about that, but to me, it's essentially this industry exploitation. And to me, it's a huge loss that athletics thinks that because they always have younger folks, that they think this is an NFL or WNBA team that you just need to continue bringing in younger blood, and that's good for performance. Well, this isn't necessarily like a cardiovascular activity. This is about, there's tons of institutional knowledge that is benefit that I've already talked about that we're losing on that, but you're already seeing this greater chance of employee exploitation. You're also seeing a workaholism issue. If you're called to something, if you find it really fulfilling, it can also expose you to a greater amount of workaholism. And then you're also more willing to accept toxic leadership, which then means athletics continues to put people in charge or put people in positions that maybe aren't as helpful. And again, I saw some comments in here. I definitely am not saying there's lots of great administrators out there, but we need lots more of them. So I don't want anyone to feel like, hey, this is always an administrator problem, but there's lots of toxic leaders out there that can make things toxic for everyone below them. And so to me, that's the big thing, what's going on. Calling provides some benefits on the individual side, can resist you from this burnout overwork climate, but it also lets the industry take advantage of us. And it also means that they try to push you and think that it's no big deal if you quit because they can bring someone else in. And that's the big loss. If you have someone that's called to your profession, called to work for your organization, that's like the greatest gift ever to an employer. And athletics sometimes treats it like it's just like a nickel on the ground, like it's no big deal. Like, we should be cherishing these people and holding on, because at some point you're going to start losing enough people that people aren't always going to be changing over. And this goes to my last thing on this before I turn this over to Brittany. I've been doing a data collection because I'm going to be sending lots of you an email for a new survey that we're going on in the fall, but I'm wanting to see the retention. So I picked 50 D1 schools randomly recently to see how many people are still there from when we did the last staff directory update in fall 2019. And through 7 schools so far in D1, the average retention rate is only 50%. So on average, D1 athletics is cycling over half their employee base every 18 months. That's insane. That would lap any Fortune 500 company right now, but everyone's doing it. I've even had a school I updated yesterday that was as low as 30%. That they only have 1 of every 3 employees that they had from 18 months ago. So enough on this. I'll turn this over to Brittany.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what I talked about earlier was I absolutely loved working in athletics. Especially in the ticket ops thing, I never kind of strayed away from my first job in college to all my internships to my last job. It was all in ticket operations because I loved working with the fans, talking with the fans, but also working with all of the different departments that I got to work with. And I mean, all of the jobs that I had, all the different schools I worked with, I had the issues, I had the anxiety, I had the tough days, the bad days, but also really, really good days. And that love for this job and for this industry kept me going. And it wasn't really until this past year where I just kind of felt like I was running in place and not getting anywhere. And I remember there was a football game, which football games were my absolute favorite event to work. I got up, watched football game day, had my coffee, got excited, pumped up, went into work. I realized that wasn't what I was doing those days. I realized I was walking around and I realized that I didn't have that enjoyment that I had before. And it broke my heart. And I realized, and again, even with the technical side, I loved working with our ticket system. We worked with Pacquiao and I've worked in Ticketmaster. Like I loved working with those systems and having this industry be so broad, having colleagues throughout the whole country, I absolutely loved. And I'm like, where am I going to work that you have that? It's so unique. And you kind of mentioned it before. It's so fun to talk about. I'm going to have a job in accounting for some like random company. That's not fun to talk about. So there's so many parts of this job and this industry that I absolutely love that I was afraid to kind of get out of, but I hit a point where I couldn't do it anymore. And that, again, it broke my heart. But you kind of see that when I posted my thing on LinkedIn, I had people that were still in the industry and people that had left the industry saying that's kind of what I went through. And it's just heartbreaking because you don't want to see that at all. And so that's where I'm hoping that this kind of conversation on this platform can start that conversation to change, to be better.
So we see a comment come in from Tony, D2AD, talking about allowing staff to telework. We've talked some about remote work here. Matt, your research has looked at remote work. I mean, obviously we saw over COVID that remote work was possible as everybody was forced to work remotely. But what did you find in terms of the relationship between remote work and satisfaction, or maybe the blurring of lines that existed between work and family?
Yeah, so I'll kind of follow up and also say what I responded to Tony because I think it was good. But yeah, we got lucky. We sent out a survey to a lot of you in the fall of 2019, and then COVID hit, and every one of us had to shut down athletics. Like NCAA paused everything, and I'm assuming a lot of the junior college and NAIA schools that might be on here also had the same pause. And it was a good time to kind of see what was going on. Because athletics has always been this big physical presence required type thing. Even if you're traveling a lot, they want you in the office, but now they're being forced, whether they wanted to or not, to allow people to work remotely. And we got lots of responses from people that there was a challenge, definitely in the beginning, of getting used to the switch. And I think that wasn't just an athletics thing. I think pretty much anyone working anywhere realized that there was issues of communication, and organizations were trying to figure out how much freedom you should have at home to access documentation, all that stuff. But we saw lots of benefits, but then also some drawbacks that I think to me are easily fixable. But one thing before we even got to COVID, we did a study that got published. And again, I can share all these articles with anyone that wants them, but we found that job flexibility increased work engagement. And to me, that was big because job flexibility didn't increase workaholism. It just increased the work engagement. So it was only a positive thing. And that isn't just being a permanently or a purely remote work. It's just allowing that greater telecommunity or telework that Tony talked about, that message in there. But then we also saw that some negatives, also remote work decreased negative work family spillover. So we saw lots of a reduction of your work negatively affecting your family life. And to me, that was big. It's essentially allowing you to control the flow and when you do your work. We also did not see any change from job performance. So working remotely did not say that people were working any less efficiently, performing any worse, anything like that, that people were actually seeing a decrease in that negative work family spillover. So that was a huge benefit. Now, two things that we saw that were negative. One, I mentioned earlier, was that workaholism went up. And that was because I think people were always working and they were at home and you couldn't go anywhere else. So it was easy to tap into work because wherever you were working, you were at all the time. And that's something that's going to need some tweaking. To me, the big thing is I think having some type of a hybrid model is the best for everybody. You can work some in the office, some at home, but also have stretches where you work in the office. Like I know for like a position like Brittany's during the season, it might not be very tenable to work from home very often. But then when you're not in season, you might have a lot of flexibility to make that happen. But the other thing is we saw people with young children, as someone with a 3-year-old and a soon to be 9-month-old in next week, I can realize that like doing this is amazing that I don't have her on my lap while we're doing that, which would have been terrible for everybody. But people with young children, it's really tough to do remote work because now working might be provide the salvation or that quick salvo moment away from kids to allow you to transition from one to the other. But again, that kind of goes to the reverse. If we talk about workaholism, the work's always involved. Remote work for those with young children just kind of means that you're always in that family role. Even if you are working, it's tough to disconnect. So to me, again, hybrid's going to be great for those folks, but there's also going to be times that remote work, even for weeks, 2 weeks at a time, can be really big. But those are going to be the big things that are going to go on. I think remote work is going to be moving forward. I'm hoping athletics is going to keep some of this. But I mentioned to Tony, I think it's awesome that he's allowing his employees to do 1 day a week. That's going to be huge. There's so much you can get done at home while still getting your work done that you can also do family-wise that you'll never be able to do when in person. And that's going to be the big piece that's going to be going on there. But again, when it comes to summer, if there's downtimes, if you can stretch that out to 2 or 3 days a week, like, hey, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Tuesday, Thursday, or even let the unit decide what days everybody's going to get from home to make sure you get the coverage that you want in person if it's necessary, that would be huge. And you could really create some flexibility and great family time that you're trying to create with work-life integration, but you can create by providing greater access to that.
And I know we've hit on some of these recommendations throughout. We just have a few minutes left. We've talked about, remote work and creating times in the work calendar if it's possible to work remotely, freeing up time over the summer. Any of the things that you wanted to hit on here briefly, Matt, in maybe the next 60 seconds or so?
Yeah, I think a lot of these that I hit are going to be really important. I think the less hours in summer seems like a slam dunk if we're talking about for the athletics itself for across the board, but you're going to have different units that need different times of what's going on. But then I have some great ideas. And like, if you're an athletic department, you really want your family, like the work family integration, there's ways to get the family involved that also doesn't make them feel like you're now requiring the employee to be the parent or the kid that brings their parent, or you also have other family there and having to do your family and work life at the same time. And that could be providing greater access to childcare that's going on. Also having more fun family events that isn't requiring the employee to work. It truly lets them separate from that. Those are going to be really big for what's going on for the recommendations. You're also, to me, the big thing is, I know we'd love to talk about salary and I can get to, that's a whole another ball of wax, but the retention, treat the employees you have is really important. We need to hold on to them. Getting new people all the time, it should not be the answer. Like, I'm already seeing that the athletic departments that are most successful seem to be holding on to people much longer. That's not a surprise to me. And that's the thing, is to spend more time and resources to hold on to the folks that you have, because they're going to be much better right now than they will when whoever you're hiring. That's going to take a time for them to load up and be as successful as who you're losing.
Listen, I know we're up against the timer here. We wanted to take a minute to thank everybody. Matt, do you want a quick plug to some of your coworkers that you've researched with on some of these studies?
Yeah, so you can see we have especially if you want to connect with me, send me an email or Jason an email. We also have our Twitter handle there in case you don't want to send an email and you'd rather do like a DM on there. That's great. But yeah, Liz Taylor, if you can follow, you can find Elizabeth Taylor or Liz Taylor on Twitter. She's kind of like my partner in crime on those research. She's not at UC, she's at Temple University, but she's amazing. If you can follow her too, we're going to be doing lots of stuff. And again, you'll be getting an email from me in the fall. Please fill that out. I know you get a ton of surveys, but try to remember my name so when it comes across, you don't just automatically delete it.
Listen, we really appreciate everybody's comments. We tried to get to as many questions as we could. We will be sending this PowerPoint slide out as well as a link to this video so you can share with your colleagues. We welcome to continue this conversation. Our email addresses for all three of us are there. So if you have other questions, please feel free to reach out. We're happy to connect with you. We can get you connected with some other folks over on the academic side that are doing some important research in this space. And if you'd like us to, present or talk within your athletic departments, share any research. One of the things Matt talked about in terms of tools for success was getting this information out in front of administrators. So more than happy to do that as well. Brittany, thank you so much for your time, and thank you to NACDA for this opportunity. If you have questions about our sport administration master's program at the University of Cincinnati, we'd love to answer those questions as well and have you take a look at our program. Thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks. Give us a follow on Twitter. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye.
Thank you.